He was once the best. A relentless narcotics officer feared by criminals and trusted by her team. But one lie destroyed everything. Framed, disgraced, and forced into exile, Maya Sinclair thought she had left it all behind. But the past never stays buried, especially when the man who took everything from her is back. And this time he's coming for more. The wind whistled through the dry New Mexico plains, kicking up dust along the old wooden fences. Maya Sinclair stood by the stables, tossing hay into the feeding troughs as the early morning sun stretched across the sky. The place was quiet just the way she liked it. But that peace was always temporary. She pulled off her gloves and leaned against a post, looking out over the open fields. This ranch wasn't just land, it was the last thing she had left of her family. 6 years ago her entire life fell apart. One minute she was one of the best narcotics officers in the state. The next she was the woman everyone whispered about, the one who got caught up in a scandal too big to outrun. She didn't hide. She didn't run. But she also wasn't ready to fight. A deep rumbling in the distance pulled her out of her thoughts. She turned her head just as an old Chevy Tahoe rolled up the dirt road, dust trailing behind it. The second she saw the car she knew. John Carter was back. Maya exhaled sharply and wiped the sweat off her forehead with the back of her hand. She hadn't seen John in years. Last time she did he was a broken man, his wife killed in the crossfire of a cartel war, left alone with his daughter, Jenny. The car slowed to a stop at the gate. The door creaked open and John stepped out, his face a little older, a little more tired. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking. Finally, John broke the silence. Been a while, Maya. Maya crossed her arms. Not long enough. John smirked, but it wasn't the kind of smirk that meant good to see you. It was the kind that said I bring bad news. Walter Monroe is out. Maya's expression didn't change, but inside something clenched. Walter Monroe. A name she hadn't heard in years but never forgot once. He was just another name on her case file. A high-profile drug kingpin she'd spent years building a case against. But before she could take him down he got to her first. Framed her. Destroyed her career. Took everything from her and now? He was free. John leaned against his car, pulling a pack of cigarettes from his jacket. He lit one, taking a slow drag before speaking again. He's not just out, Maya. He's looking for you. Maya let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Then he's wasting his time. That part of my life is over. John blew out a stream of smoke. Yeah. Well, that's the problem. You might be done with him, but he's not done with you. Maya turned away, walking back toward the stables, trying to shake off the weight pressing against her chest. But John wasn't finished. If you don't stop him, Jenny's next. That stopped her cold. She turned back, eyes locking onto John's. What did you just say? John stepped forward, voice lower, more serious. Walter's got people everywhere. You think he's just gonna let you live your quiet little life out here? He's tying up loose ends, Maya. And if you don't do something, my daughter could end up like my wife. Maya clenched her jaw. Jenny was just a kid. She had nothing to do with this. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. I'm sorry, John. But I'm not going back into that world. John stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. You don't have to. It'll come to you. With that, he flicked his cigarette to the ground, stomped it out, and got back into his truck. A moment later, the engine roared to life and he pulled away, disappearing down the dirt road. Maya stood there, watching the dust settle, willing herself to believe she had made the right decision. Then out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. A flash of headlights on the distant hill. Someone was watching, and just like that she knew the past wasn't done with her yet. Maya starts noticing more signs that she's being watched. And if you're enjoying the story so far, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The sun had barely risen when Maya drove into town. She didn't come here often, not unless she had to. Silver Ridge was the kind of place where people never forgot, and Maya Sinclair was a name that still carried weight, even if most folks would rather not say it out loud. She could feel it the second she stepped out of her truck. The quick glances. The hushed whispers. People didn't forget. Some still saw her as the officer she used to be, but most just saw the woman whose name was tangled up in something dirty. Some believed the rumors. Some didn't care either way. But no one was in a hurry to welcome her back. Maya ignored the stares and pushed open the door to Duke Mason's general store. The bell above the entrance chimed as she walked in, the scent of dust and old wood filling the air. Duke stood behind the counter, flipping through a shipment list. He glanced up when he saw her, his expression unreadable. "Maya," he said. His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't cold either. "Just watchful," she nodded. "Duke." Maya moved through the aisles, grabbing what she needed: coffee, canned goods, a few supplies for the ranch. The whole time she could feel Duke's gaze following her. "Watching. Judging. You're in town early," he finally said as she placed her items on the counter. Maya smirked. "Didn't realize I needed an appointment." Duke scanned the items, punching in the prices. "People talk, that's all." Maya met his gaze, waiting. Duke didn't make her ask. "Word is John Carter's back. And he came straight to you." Maya tensed slightly but kept her expression neutral. Of course people would talk. Nothing stayed a secret in a town like this. Duke finished bagging her items and slid them across the counter. "Word is you've got unfinished business." Maya grabbed the bag, saying nothing. She turned to leave, but before she stepped outside, Duke spoke again. "Just be careful, Maya. Trouble has a way of finding you." Maya walked out into the morning sun, tossing her bag into the passenger seat of her truck. The town was waking up, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still back in the store, turning over Duke's words. Unfinished business. She pulled the driver's side door open, but something made her stop. A black SUV sat parked across the street. Tinted windows. No plates. It hadn't been there when she went inside. Maya stayed calm, didn't stare. Just climbed into her truck, started the engine and pulled out onto the road like nothing was wrong. But as she glanced at the mirror, her grip on the wheel tightened. The SUV didn't move. Not yet, but Maya had spent years reading danger signs, and this was just the beginning. Maya thought she could outrun the past, but now it's catching up. Someone's watching her, following her, and the town is already whispering. Maya didn't drive straight home. Instead, she took the long way around, weaving through back roads, keeping an eye on her mirrors. The black SUV hadn't followed her, but that didn't mean she was safe. Someone wanted her to know they were watching. They wanted her on edge. And if that was the game they wanted to play, she was more than ready. She pulled into a small gas station just outside of town, killed the engine and sat there for a moment, thinking. This wasn't paranoia. She knew what it felt like to be hunted. It had been years, but the instinct never left. Her eyes scanned the parking lot. Empty except for a rusted pickup truck by the pumps. The only other person inside was the cashier, a lanky teenager slouched behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. Maya stepped inside, grabbed a bottle of water and approached the counter, keeping her voice casual. "You see that black SUV parked across from Duke's store earlier?" The kid barely looked up. "Maybe." Maya pulled a 20 from her pocket, setting it on the counter. "Maybe you remember who was inside?" That got his attention. He frowned, thinking. "Didn't see much. Just some guy sitting there. Didn't get out, didn't go inside. Just waiting." Her stomach tightened. "What did he look like?" The kid shrugged. "Didn't see his face. Window was cracked a little. Looked like he was smoking." Maya nodded, pocketing her change. "Let me know if you see him again." The kid smirked. "Sure. But, what exactly am I looking for?" She met his eyes, her tone steady. "Trouble." By the time Maya pulled up to her ranch, the sun was dipping low, stretching long shadows across the dry land. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees, but something about the air felt off. He sat there for a moment, listening. The horses were calm, the fences unbroken. Nothing seemed out of place. But the feeling in her gut wouldn't leave. She reached under her seat, fingers curling around the grip of the .45 she kept stashed there. Just in case. Stepping out of the truck, she moved slowly, scanning the property as she walked toward the house. Then she saw it. The front door was cracked open. Maya froze. She had locked that door. Her grip tightened on the gun as she stepped onto the porch. Her heartbeat was steady, her breath slow. She nudged the door open with the barrel of the gun, eyes sweeping the room. Nothing looked disturbed, but the energy in the house was different. Then she saw it. A cigarette, still burning, smoldering in the ashtray. Someone had been here and they hadn't left long ago. Before she could process it, a voice broke through the silence. "Still paranoid, huh?" Maya spun, gun raised, only to find herself staring into the smirking face of tiny Tony. Tony leaned against the wall like he belonged there, arms crossed, looking just as cocky as ever. He hadn't changed much since she last saw him. Still sharp. Still dangerous. Still someone who couldn't be trusted. Maya didn't lower the gun. Give me one reason not to shoot you. Tony chuckled. Come on, Sinclair. We both know if you were gonna pull that trigger you'd have done it already. She said nothing, just tightened her jaw. Tony pushed off the wall, taking a slow step forward. You're making people nervous, Maya. You were supposed to stay buried. No. You got John Carter knocking on your door. You're asking questions around town. That's not a good look. Maya exhaled sharply, lowering the gun just slightly. So what, you're here to scare me? Tony shook his head. I'm here to help you. That made her laugh. Yeah. And why the hell would I trust you? Tony's smirk faltered just slightly. Because if you don't back off, Walter's gonna send someone a lot worse than me. She studied him for a moment. Tiny Tony was a liar, a manipulator, a backstabber. But he wasn't stupid. If he was warning her, that meant she was already in deep. Maya stepped closer, voice low. Then you go tell Walter that if he wants me gone, he can come do it himself. Tony sighed, shaking his head. I was afraid you'd say that. Before she could react, he reached down, plucked the cigarette from the ashtray and crushed it under his boot. Be seeing you, Sinclair. And just like that he was gone. Maya stood there, heart pounding, staring at the door he had just walked out of. She had her answer now. She wasn't just being watched, the hunt had already begun. Maya thought she had time. She thought she could figure this out before things got messy. But now Walter Monroe has made his move. And Tiny Tony just made one thing clear. This is only the beginning. If they wanted a fight, they just got one. Maya goes on the offensive. If you've been keeping up, you already know. This isn't a story you want to miss. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her, her mind racing through every possible angle. Tiny Tony showing up at her house wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Walter Monroe knew exactly where she was. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He was making moves. And if she didn't act first, she wouldn't get another chance. For 6 years, she had told herself she was done. That she could leave it all behind, live a quiet life and let the past stay buried. But the past had a way of clawing its way back to the surface. And now she had two choices. Wait for the next attack or strike first. By the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, she had already made her decision. It was time to fight back. Maya knew exactly where to start. If she wanted to take down Walter, she needed information. And there was only one person who could get it for her. Harris Card. She hadn't seen Harris in years, but she knew he hadn't changed. A former black market hacker turned underground information broker, Harris didn't care who he worked for, so long as the money was good. He wasn't loyal to anyone but himself, which made him both useful and dangerous. Maya found him exactly where she expected. A rundown internet cafe on the outskirts of town, hidden in plain sight. The place smelled like stale coffee and old circuits. Rows of dusty computers hummed softly, their screens reflecting neon light against the grimy walls. She spotted him in the back, hunched over a laptop, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. He looked up as she approached, raising an eyebrow before leaning back in his chair with a smirk. Well, if it isn't Maya Sinclair. Thought you were dead. Maya pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Not yet. Harris studied her for a moment, then grinned. Then I'm guessing you didn't come here for the free Wi-Fi. She slid a folded stack of bills across the table. I need everything you've got on Walter Monroe. His operations. His accounts. His movements. Harris picked up the money, flipping through it lazily. You really think I'm just gonna hand that over? Walter's a dangerous man. Maya leaned forward, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. So am I. For a moment, Harris just stared at her, the smirk slipping from his face. Then he let out a slow breath and reached for his laptop. You're lucky. I just might have something. Harris worked fast, pulling up encrypted files, offshore bank accounts and hidden transactions. Maya leaned in, scanning the data as fast as her eyes could move. This isn't just drug money, she muttered. He's laundering something bigger. Harris nodded, clicking through files. Weapons. High-end buyers. And get this. He's using the same accounts that were linked to the case that took you down. Maya's stomach turned. Walter wasn't just rebuilding his empire. He was tying up loose ends. Who else knows about this? She asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. Harris hesitated. One guy. A former associate. He's been trying to cut a deal, but Walter's men are hunting him down. Maya's pulse quickened. Who? Harris hesitated again, then turned the laptop toward her. The name on the screen made her chest tighten. Frank McKenna, the sheriff, the one person in town who had never fully turned his back on her. Maya shot to her feet, grabbing her keys. Where is he? Harris frowned. Last I heard, he was holed up at his cabin outside of town. Maya was already moving. She just hoped she wasn't too late. The drive to McKenna's cabin was fast, reckless. Dust kicked up behind Maya's truck as she sped down the winding road, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Her mind was racing. If McKenna knew something, if he had proof, then he was as much of a target as she was. By the time she pulled up, she knew something was wrong. The front door was wide open. Maya jumped out of the truck, gun drawn, heart hammering in her chest. She moved cautiously, stepping inside, scanning the room. The place had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor. But the worst part, the part that made her stomach turn, was the blood. Not a lot, but enough. Her eyes swept the floor, searching for any sign of what had happened. That's when she saw it. A single bullet casing lying near the doorway. Maya clenched her jaw. McKenna had been here. Someone else had too. And now he was gone. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Walter had just made this personal. No more waiting. No more running. It was time to end this. McKenna knew something, and now he was missing. Walter Monroe wasn't just covering his tracks. He was erasing them. Maya had spent 6 years trying to stay out of this fight. Now, she was going to burn it all down. Maya tracks down Walter's next move, and gets one step closer to the truth. If you've made it this far, you already know. This story is just getting started. The air was thick with dust as Maya sped back toward town, her mind racing just as fast as the engine growling beneath her. McKenna was gone. Taken? Killed? She didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. Walter Monroe was tying up loose ends. And if she didn't act fast, she could be next. She pulled into John Carter's driveway, gravel crunching under her tires as she threw the truck into park. John stepped out onto the porch before she even killed the engine, his face unreadable, arms crossed over his chest. He had been expecting her. Maya slammed the door shut and marched toward him. McKenna's missing. John's expression didn't change. Figured it was only a matter of time. Maya stopped in front of him, anger simmering just beneath the surface. That's all you've got to say? John sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I warned you, Maya. Walter isn't playing around. If McKenna had something that could hurt him, he was never gonna live long enough to use it. Maya shook her head. He's not dead. Not yet. John's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Because if Walter wanted him dead, he wouldn't have left a mess. That cabin was meant to send a message. He's holding McKenna somewhere. John studied her for a moment before nodding. Then we find him. Maya exhaled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. I have a lead. Harris Carr dug into Walter's accounts. There's a shipment moving tonight. Guns, maybe something bigger. If we can track it, it might lead us to McKenna. John didn't hesitate. Then we better get moving. Night had fully settled over Silver Ridge by the time Maya and John reached the old industrial district on the edge of town. It had been years since the factories shut down, leaving behind hollowed-out warehouses and rusted machinery. The perfect place for someone like Walter Monroe to conduct business away from prying eyes. They parked a few blocks away, moving through the shadows toward a warehouse with dim lights glowing from inside. The faint hum of an engine reached Maya's ears before she saw them. 2 black SUVs, parked near the loading dock. The same kind that had been following her. She exchanged a glance with John. Looks like we found our shipment. They crept closer, keeping low behind a stack of abandoned crates. Through the warehouse's broken windows, Maya spotted 3 men unloading crates from the back of a truck. One of them she recognized instantly. Tiny Tony. John muttered a curse under his breath. Of course that bastard's involved. Maya wasn't focused on Tony though. Her eyes were on the crates. The markings on the side weren't local. They were military-grade shipments. This wasn't just about drugs or money anymore. Walter was arming someone. A cold chill ran down her spine. This was bigger than she thought. Then she saw him, Frank McKenna. He was inside, hands tied to a chair, bruised and bloody but alive. Maya's grip tightened around her gun. "We're getting him out." John nodded. "What's the play?" Maya exhaled, steadying herself. "We take out the lights. 'Cause a distraction. Get McKenna out before they know what's happening." John smirked. "Just like old times." He gave him a look. "Let's hope we're not as rusty as we feel." Everything happened fast. Maya took aim and fired at the nearest floodlight. The warehouse was plunged into darkness. Shouts rang out from inside, confusion spreading through Walter's men. John moved first, taking out the closest guard with a quick, silent takedown. Maya slipped through the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs as she reached McKenna's side. "Sheriff," she whispered, crouching next to him. His face was swollen, his lips split, but his eyes still held fire. "Took you long enough," he rasped. Maya smirked, slicing through the ropes binding his wrists. "Next time send an invitation." Footsteps thundered toward them. "Move." John shouted. Maya yanked McKenna up, half carrying him as they bolted for the side exit. Gunfire exploded behind them, bullets whizzing past as they dove behind a stack of metal barrels. Tiny Tony's voice rang out. "Maya, you really want to do this?" She peeked over the barrels, spotting Tony near the truck, gun in hand. His men fanned out behind him. "Last chance," he called. "Walk away." Maya stood, raising her gun. Not a chance. For a split second, everything was still, then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Maya returned fire, dropping two of Tony's men before ducking back behind cover. John laid down suppression fire, giving Maya enough time to drag McKenna toward the back exit. A bullet slammed into the metal near her head, sparks flying too close. They reached the door just as tires screeched outside. Headlights flooded the alley. A new SUV, then a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years. "That's enough." Maya froze. Walter Monroe stepped out of the vehicle, hands in his pockets, the same smug look on his face he always had. She felt her blood run hot. Walter smiled. "Miss me?" Maya tightened her grip on her gun. This wasn't over. Not even close. Maya thought she was calling the shots. She thought she had the upper hand. She was wrong. Walter Monroe just walked back into her life. And this time he's not hiding. Maya faces the man who ruined her life. And if you think she's going down without a fight, you don't know Maya Sinclair. The night air was thick with dust and gunpowder, the echoes of gunfire still ringing in Maya's ears. But none of that mattered now. Walter Monroe was standing right in front of her. For 6 years, she had imagined this moment. She had replayed it over and over in her mind, picturing what she would say, what she would do, how it would feel to finally stand face to face with the man who had destroyed her life. But now that he was here, grinning like he hadn't ripped everything away from her, all she felt was the fire burning in her chest. Walter took a slow step forward, the same smug look on his face that she remembered all too well. "Miss me?" he asked, hands in his pockets like this was just another business deal. Maya's grip on her gun tightened. "One shot. That's all it would take." John moved beside her, his voice low but firm. "Maya. Not here." Walter smirked, shaking his head like he found the whole situation amusing. "Listen to your friend, Sinclair. You don't want to do something you'll regret." Maya's jaw clenched. "I've had 6 years of regrets, Walter. But shooting you won't be one of them." Walter chuckled, clearly enjoying himself. "Same old Sinclair. Always thinking you've got the upper hand." He gestured lazily at the bodies scattered around them, the bullet-ridden SUVs, the still smoking warehouse. "You should have stayed on your ranch, sweetheart. But now you're in my way." Maya ignored the taunt and took a step forward, her voice like steel. "Where's McKenna's evidence?" Walter raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh, so that's what this is about. You really think some washed-up sheriff has anything on me?" He let out a dramatic sigh, shaking his head. "You always did overestimate the good guys." Maya wasn't in the mood for his games. "Where is it?" The smirk on Walter's face faded. His voice dropped, colder now. You're too late. Maya felt her stomach tighten. What did you do? Walter pulled a phone from his jacket, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. The screen flickered and a live video feed appeared. Maya's breath caught. McKenna. Tied to a chair. His face bruised and bloody. The room around him dimly lit, empty except for the shadowy figure standing just behind him. Walter grinned. You want your little friend back? Let's see how badly. Maya felt the familiar surge of rage rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had played this game before. She wasn't about to lose again. The video cut out, leaving only blackness. Walter tucked the phone back into his pocket and tilted his head, studying her. You and I both know how this ends, Sinclair. You can run around town, shoot a few of my guys, dig through my accounts, but at the end of the day, he smiled, stepping closer. You're alone. And you can't win. Maya's fingers twitched around the gun, every instinct screaming at her to pull the trigger. But killing Walter wouldn't bring McKenna back. It wouldn't undo the past. And it wouldn't stop whatever Walter was planning. She forced herself to exhale, keeping her voice steady. What do you want? Walter's grin widened as if he had been waiting for that question. He paced a few steps, taking his time. You were always a pain in my ass, but I'll give you credit. You've got instincts. So here's my offer. Maya said nothing, just waited. You back off. Stop digging. Stop asking questions. And in return, he pulled a cigar from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers. McKenna walks away. No harm, no loose ends. Maya felt John stiffen beside her, but she didn't take her eyes off Walter. And if I say no? She asked. Walter smiled as he struck a match, lighting the cigar. Then you get to watch him die. And maybe, just maybe, I start thinking about other loose ends. Like that sweet little girl of John's. John moved before Maya could stop him. His gun was out, aimed straight at Walter's head. You say her name again and I swear to God, Walter didn't even flinch. He just exhaled a stream of smoke, shaking his head. Now. Let's not get emotional. Maya reached out, placing a firm hand on John's arm, grounding him. She turned back to Walter, her expression unreadable. Where and when? Walter grinned. Tomorrow night. Midnight. The old train yard. He flicked his cigar away, grinding it under his boot. Come alone. With that he turned, walking back toward his SUV like he didn't have a care in the world. His men followed, engines roaring to life as the convoy pulled away, leaving behind nothing but silence and dust. Maya stood there, heart hammering, watching the taillights disappear into the night. John let out a breath, still gripping his gun so tightly his knuckles were white. You're not actually going to walk into that trap, are you? Maya didn't answer right away. She just stared after Walter, her mind already racing. No, she said finally. I'm going to set my own. Walter Monroe just made a mistake. He thinks he's in control. He thinks Maya's just another loose end to clean up, but he's about to find out. She's not the one who should be afraid the trap is set. And Maya isn't coming alone. And if you're enjoying the story so far, hit the like button and subscribe. The old train yard was nothing but rusted steel and abandoned tracks. The kind of place that had been forgotten by time. The wind howled through the empty rail cars, rattling loose metal sheets and stirring up dust. It was the perfect place for a deal, or a grave. Maya crouched behind a stack of crates, scanning the area. Walter Monroe wanted her to come alone. And as far as he knew, she had. But she wasn't stupid. She knew better than to walk into a trap without setting one of her own. The plan was simple. Walter thought he was hunting her. But tonight the roles were about to be reversed. She pressed her fingers to the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair. John, you in position? John's voice crackled in her ear. Yeah. I've got eyes on the entrance. Harris is patched into the security feeds. There's at least 6 of Walter's guys inside, maybe more. Maya took a slow breath. McKenna? A brief pause. Then John's voice, tight with tension. Still alive. They've got him in one of the storage containers. Tied up but breathing. Maya exhaled, steadying herself. Good. Stick to the plan. She rose to her feet, gun tucked into the back of her jeans, and stepped forward into the open. It didn't take long for them to notice her point. 2 men emerged from the shadows, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them held up a hand, motioning for her to stop. "That's far enough." Maya didn't flinch. "I'm here for Walter." The man smirked. "He's waiting." Without another word, they led her through the maze of rusted train cars and crumbling platforms. The scent of oil and metal filled the air. She counted each step, each possible exit, each blind spot where John or Harris could have set up overwatch. And then finally she saw him. Walter stood near an old freight container, dressed in his usual tailored suit, his expression calm, almost amused. Like he had already won. "Maya," he greeted, spreading his arms like they were old friends. "Right on time." She stopped a few feet away, her stance loose but ready. "Where's McKenna?" Walter sighed, shaking his head. "Straight to business. No pleasantries." Maya's voice was like steel. "Cut the crap, Walter." Walter studied her for a moment, then nodded to one of his men. The container door creaked open and Maya's stomach tightened as she saw McKenna, tied to a chair, blood staining the front of his shirt. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. "For now," Walter said as if reading her mind. Maya's hands curled into fists. "Let him go." Walter smirked. "And what do I get in return?" She held his gaze. "You get to keep breathing." For a moment there was silence. Then Walter laughed. A deep, amused chuckle, as if she had just told the best joke he had ever heard. "Oh, Maya," he sighed, shaking his head. "You really haven't changed." Maya didn't blink. "Neither have you. Still hiding behind other people. Still making deals you can't keep." Walter's amusement faded. His eyes darkened. "You don't get it, do you?" He took a slow step forward. "You lost the moment you walked in here." Maya just smiled. "Did I?" Then she pressed the button in her pocket. The entire train yard went dark. The explosion of gunfire came first. A shot cracked through the air, followed by the panicked shouts of Walter's men as John opened fire from his position above. Maya moved instantly, dropping low as bullets ripped through the air. Walter's men scrambled for cover, but they weren't prepared. John and Harris had cut the floodlights, plunging the yard into chaos. Maya lunged forward, slamming her elbow into the throat of the nearest guard before ripping the rifle from his hands. She turned just in time to see Tiny Tony charging toward her, a knife glinting in his hand. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist and twisted. The knife clattered to the ground and she drove her knee into his ribs, sending him crashing against the metal siding of the train car. "Maya." John's voice came through the earpiece. "McKenna's container. 3 guards outside." Maya didn't hesitate. She sprinted through the chaos, weaving between old train cars as gunfire erupted around her. She spotted the storage container ahead, 3 men guarding the entrance. She raised her stolen rifle. 3 shots. 3 bodies hit the ground. She didn't stop moving. The container door groaned as she yanked it open, stepping inside. McKenna blinked up at her, dazed but conscious. "Took you long enough." Maya smirked, already slicing through the ropes binding his wrists. "Next time send an invitation." McKenna groaned as he pushed himself up. "Next time I'll stay retired." Maya slung his arm over her shoulder and pulled him toward the exit. The chaos outside was still raging, but Walter was nowhere to be seen. She gritted her teeth. Of course he ran. But not far. Not far enough. The gunfire had died down by the time Maya and McKenna reached the outskirts of the yard. John was waiting by the truck, reloading his weapon, blood on his sleeve but otherwise unharmed. "We need to go," he said, glancing around. "Cops will be here soon." Maya nodded, helping McKenna into the back seat. But she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. She turned, scanning the darkened train yard. Walter was still out there. And she wasn't about to let him slip away again. Then she saw it. A black SUV tearing out of the lot, dust kicking up behind it. Maya's eyes narrowed. No more running. She climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. "John, get McKenna out of here." John frowned. "Maya, what are you?" "I'm ending this." Before he could stop her, she slammed on the gas, the truck roaring to life as she tore after Walter Monroe. The hunt was over. Well, it was time for the kill. Walter Monroe just ran out of places to hide. Maya has been chasing ghosts for 6 years. Now she's chasing the real thing. The final showdown. If you've been waiting for Maya Sinclair to take back everything Walter stole from her, you don't want to miss what happens next. The truck roared down the deserted highway, headlights slicing through the darkness. Maya gripped the wheel, her pulse hammering in her ears as she kept her eyes locked on the black SUV ahead. Walter Monroe was running. Not this time. Her foot pressed harder against the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching as she closed the distance. Walter swerved, trying to shake her, but Maya knew these roads better than he did. He was panicking. He wasn't used to being the one on the other side of the chase. Maya grabbed her pistol from the passenger seat and rolled down the window. The wind whipped at her face as she raised the gun and fired. 2 shots. The first missed. The second didn't. The SUV jerked to the right as a tire blew out. Walter lost control, the vehicle skidding violently before slamming into the guardrail. The sound of metal screeching against metal echoed into the night as the car came to a crashing halt, steam hissing from under the hood. Maya didn't hesitate. She skidded to a stop, throwing the truck into park before jumping out, gun in hand. The driver's side door creaked open. Walter stumbled out, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. He coughed, holding his ribs, his breath ragged. For the first time in his life he looked afraid. Maya leveled the gun at him. "It's over." Walter wiped the blood from his mouth and gave a weak laugh. "You think so?" Maya stepped closer, her grip steady. "No more deals. No more running. You don't get to walk away from this." Walter's smirk faltered. He took a slow step back, eyes flicking toward the wrecked SUV. "You won't do it," he said, voice strained. "You're still playing by the rules. That's why you lost before, Maya. You think pulling the trigger ends this." Maya didn't move. "No," she said. "But it's a start." Walter lunged. Maya fired. The shot rang out into the night. Walter staggered, his knees buckling as he collapsed against the wreckage. He gasped, his hands pressing against the bullet wound in his chest. He looked up at her, realization dawning in his fading eyes. She had finally won. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but nothing came. A few seconds later he was gone. Maya let out a slow breath, lowering the gun. The weight that had pressed against her chest for 6 years finally lifted. It was over. The sirens came in the distance, flashing lights reflecting against the road as John's truck pulled up behind her. He jumped out, gun drawn, but when he saw Walter's body he stopped. Maya turned to face him. "It's done." John stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah. It is." The sound of tires crunching over gravel pulled Maya's attention away. Another vehicle rolled to a stop, a police cruiser. Frank McKenna stepped out, still bruised but standing. He looked from Walter's body to Maya, then let out a slow breath. "Damn. Guess I owe you one." Maya shook her head. "Just doing what I should have done a long time ago." McKenna smirked. "I'll make sure this gets written up the right way." She nodded, knowing what he meant. Walter Monroe wouldn't be terrorizing anyone ever again. Maya turned, looking at the dark horizon. For the first time in years she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was finally free. Days passed. The dust settled. The world kept turning. Maya sat on the porch of her ranch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The scars of the past would always be there, but they didn't own her anymore. John stepped out onto the porch, handing her a cold beer. "So what now?" Maya took a sip, thinking. "Not sure. Guess I'll figure it out." John chuckled. "Well, whatever it is, you won't have to do it alone." Maya looked at him, then out at the open land stretching in front of them. The past was behind her. Now it was time to start living again. Maya Sinclair spent 6 years running from a war she didn't start. Now, she's finally won. But life doesn't stop when the fight ends. New beginnings aren't always easy. Maybe Maya's story isn't over after all. Would you want to see what comes next? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.